$5 million. That was the number my grandma said out loud in her thin, steady voice, right before my family laughed in her face. Even now, the memory feels cold and metallic, like touching the inside of a freezer with bare hands. She stood there with her coat still on, holding out a small silver key as if she were handing us a reminder to pick up dry cleaning. Nothing dramatic, nothing showy. Just that soft announcement that sliced straight through the room. It was the first week after New Year. The living room still smelled like leftover pine, the kind that lingers long after the tree has been dragged outside. Tinsel drooped along the railing. A half-finished puzzle sat on the coffee table. My mom liked to host this gathering every year, mostly as a way to prove everything in our family was normal, even when it had never been. My dad fussed with the thermostat the moment Grandma walked in, like warm air could soften whatever she was about to say. Colin settled into his seat with his boots stretched out, the posture of a man prepared to be entertained. Jonah kept leaning forward, that grin already forming, the one he wore before he even heard the joke. My mom and dad exchanged that quick, uneasy look they always shared whenever Grandma spoke in a way they did not care to interpret. Polite confusion on her face, strategic avoidance on his. It was a silent choreography they had perfected for decades. Grandma looked smaller in the winter coat, but there was nothing small about her presence. Her eyes were so clear that I felt myself sit up straighter without meaning to. She asked everyone to sit because she had something important to tell us. No one made the effort to show her respect, but they sat anyway, settling into their usual spots with the same restless impatience they brought to everything she said. She opened her purse. The motion was slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Then she pulled out several identical silver keys and placed them on the table, one by one. Soft metallic taps against the wood, like dealing cards in a game she knew how to play, but they never bothered to learn. She lifted her chin and said the sentence that cracked the room open. These keys belong to my storage unit in Boise. Everything I own is in there. Its value is roughly $5 million. Silence for one heartbeat. Then laughter exploded from every corner. Colin slapped his knee and leaned back as if she had just delivered the punchline of the century. Jonah was louder, practically wheezing. Someone else said, "Grandma must be confused again." Another asked who even wanted her old junk. One voice behind me said she probably meant emotional value, not actual money. It all blurred together into one loud dismissal that felt heavier than the words themselves. I watched the keys on the table. I watched their fingers push them aside like crumbs. I watched the disbelief twist into mockery. I watched my mom stare at the floor with tight lips. My dad nodded like, yes, yes. This confirmed his long-held belief that Grandma was becoming unpredictable. I waited for someone to defend her. No one did. I almost laughed too, not because I felt amused, but because the absurdity pressed against my ribs until something inside me needed release. My grandma was the only person in that room who had earned the right to speak without being torn apart. She had survived things none of them knew about. She had built a life with more grit than all of us combined, and still she stood there offering them something, and they treated it like the setup to a ridiculous story. Before I go any further, let me pause for one moment. I always like knowing what people are doing when they listen to stories like this. It makes the world feel a little closer and a little more human. If you feel like sharing later, tell me in the comments where you are and what you are doing as you listen. When this happened, I was sitting at that table feeling warm air blowing against my back while the rest of me went cold. Grandma did not argue. She did not explain. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked at each person as if memorizing them. The way someone studies a photograph before placing it inside a box, they do not. Plan to open again. Then she gently set the last few keys down. Jonah picked him up and spun it in his fingers before letting it fall with a clatter. "Not worth the gas money," he said. Someone else left over nuts. Another tossed it toward the trash can, missing it by inches, but not bothering to pick it up. My mom stood near the counter with folded arms, her face pinched. She wore that expression she reserved for moments she could not categorize. The ones that forced her to confront the things she pretended were not there. My dad cleared his throat and inspected the thermostat again because nothing in her found. Life intimidated him more than feelings. I waited for them to say something decent, something humane. But the silence that replaced their laughter was worse. A silence that communicated exactly where she fit in their mental arrangement of the world. somewhere below serious attention, somewhere below respect. Then Grandma turned to me. Her eyes softened, not in apology and not in pity, just recognition, as if she saw me standing there invisible in the crowd, and for the first time, someone reflected back to myself. She nodded toward my key. "You should hold on to yours." Her voice was soft, but there was nothing uncertain in the tone. It was not a suggestion. It was a directive. I picked up the key. It was warm from the sunlight hitting it, heavier than a small piece of metal should be. I closed my fingers around it. I did not say anything. My voice had always hesitated in front of people who took pleasure in watching it disappear. The conversation in the room shifted back to trivial things. Someone opened a soda. Someone bragged about a project at work. Someone else talked about football scores. All of it resuming as if the moment had not happened at all. As if a woman had not just stood before them and offered something meaningful. Grandma left soon after. She walked toward the door without waiting for goodbyes. She placed her hand briefly on the railing, steadied herself, and stepped outside. The door clicked shut behind her, soft as a final breath. I stayed at the table, the hum of voices melting into background noise. Jonah's loud laugh, Colin's lazy comments. My mom whispered to my dad about whether Grandma needed another medical evaluation, all of it swirling together like static, none of it reaching me. The key in my hand grew colder the longer I held it. I kept turning it over, tracing its ridges, letting it press into my skin. Their laughter echoed in my mind, not because it hurt, but because it revealed something I had not allowed myself to see clearly. They were not just laughing at her. They were laughing at the idea that anything from her could matter, that anything connected to her could hold value, that anything connected to me could matter either. All my life, they had treated me like an afterthought. Grandma had been the only person who treated me like someone worth understanding. And when she held out those keys, they reacted to her the same way they reacted to me. Dismissal, confusion, impatience, indifference. Something inside me shifted. Not a vow for revenge, not anger, not even hope. Just a sharp, quiet rearrangement of understanding. A lens clicking into place. A realization that their reaction said more about them than anything she had said. When dessert came out, I slipped the key into my bag. No announcement, no reason, no performance. I simply kept it, not because I believed in the $5 million, not because I expected treasure waiting in a storage unit. I kept it because she gave it to me with intention, and because deep down, beneath years of quietness and hesitation, something whispered that this key was never meant for any of them. I pressed the zipper shut. The sound was small, but final. The way a door sounds when it closes on a room you are not planning to enter again. And in that moment, I realized they had not only dismissed her words, they had dismissed mine before I ever had the chance to speak. I left the table without saying anything and walked down the hallway to the guest room, the key still warm in my hand. It was strange how something so small could feel heavier than the entire house around me. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the muffled sounds of everyone, laughing again, the way people do when they think the world has arranged itself exactly as it should. Their voices blended into a familiar blur, a background noise I had grown up hearing without ever feeling part of. I did not plan to think about my childhood that night. Memories have their own agenda, though. They push forward when the present hits an old bruise. Holding that key in my hand brought back a memory I did not ask for, the kind that arrives without knocking and settles into the room like fog. I was diagnosed with mild autism when I was little. No one ever said the words out loud in front of me, at least not in the early years. I heard it the way children often learn things, through half conversations and the way adults look at them when they think you are not paying attention. In my case, it came through the soft sighs my mom made whenever I struggled to keep up with the noise of the world. I was quiet as a kid, too quiet, according to everyone but my grandma. I needed extra time to understand what people really meant. I missed jokes. I missed hints. I missed the invisible threads that tied people together in casual conversation. I was not the kind of child you could show off at barbecues. I was not cute in a way that made people gather around. I was the kid who stood behind the adults, clutching the straps of my backpack even, in the backyard, with nowhere to go. I knew early that I was the unexpected one. I heard it once in a way I was not supposed to. My mom was talking to someone on the phone, saying she and my dad had not been ready. that they had their own plans and I had arrived right in the middle of them. She did not say it with anger. She said it with exhaustion, the kind that makes a person speak truths they later wish they had smoothed over. I learned to stay small, to speak only when I knew my words would not disrupt the room, to watch how other people reacted before I reacted myself. I copied behaviors the way some kids copied cartoons. It never quite worked. My timing was slightly off. My tone was slightly wrong. I was always half a beat out of sync. The year I turned 7, there was a birthday party for Jonah. The house was full that day, bodies everywhere, voices bouncing off the walls. I remember standing near the sliding glass door holding a small wrapped gift I had picked out with Grandma. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say to him. Happy birthday, just 2 words. He ran past me with a group of boys. So fast he knocked the gift from my hands. It hit the floor and skidded under a chair. Nobody noticed. I did not bend down to retrieve it. I just watched it disappear and waited for a moment that never came. My mom saw me standing there alone. She whispered to my dad that I was too much trouble when there were guests around. She put her hand on my shoulder and guided me to my room in a way that looked gentle from the outside. I stayed there until Grandma came upstairs to sit with me. She did not ask why I was hiding. She simply sat on the floor next to my bed and handed me the cookie she had saved in her pocket. It was after that party that I was sent to live with Grandma. Their voices sounded relieved when they said it, which told me everything I needed to know, even at 7 years old. The official explanation was that Grandma needed help around her home in Boise, and I was good at being calm and quiet. The real truth sat underneath that excuse like a stone. I was the child they did not know what to do with. Grandma never tried to fix me. She never tried to mold me into someone easier or brighter or louder. She spoke to me with patience, not pity. Her house was quiet in the best way. Not the kind of quiet forced upon you, but the kind that allows you to breathe. She noticed the small routines that grounded me. How I lined up my pencils by color. How I preferred the sound of the washing machine to the sound of a crowd. How I found comfort in closed spaces and small corners. She built a life around those things without ever making me feel like a burden. There was a night when I was 10, sitting with her in the kitchen while she shelled peas into a bowl. I asked her why I lived with her instead of my mom and dad. I did not ask it accusingly. I simply wanted to understand the pattern. She paused just long enough for a child to notice, but not long enough to cause worry. Some children come to the world a little sideways, she said. Not wrong, just different. It is the world that forgets to tilt with them. She smiled then, a small, private smile. You are not too much. You are just enough. I have held on to those words for years, even when I pretended I did not need them. Sitting in my parents' house after New Year, listening to everyone dismiss her gift as worthless trash, I felt the echo of that childhood truth settling back into place. They did not laugh because they thought she was confused. They laughed because the idea of her owning anything of real value offended their sense of superiority. They laughed because they believed nothing meaningful could come from a woman who had chosen to love a child they considered an inconvenience. When I grew older and moved back into my parents' house for a short time, I thought things would be different. I was in high school, taller and quieter, better at hiding the pauses in my speech. But familiar patterns settle fast. They kept conversations moving too quickly for me to follow. They asked questions and moved on before I finished answering. At dinners, I sat between my mom and dad like a placeholder rather than a person. At large gatherings, I drifted to the edges of rooms the way planets drift toward the outer orbit, visible and forgotten. There was Thanksgiving when one of my cousins asked why I never spoke. Before I could answer, someone said with a laugh that I had always been too much trouble for group settings. They said it affectionately, as if affection could erase the sting. I remember each of their faces turning away before I could respond. Empty space filled the room between us. I excused myself and stepped out onto the back deck, the cold air feeling like an anchor. Mom followed me a minute later. She wrapped her cardigan around her arms and looked at me with an uncomfortable sort of love. The kind that does not know where to land. You know they do not mean anything by it, she said. Her voice was soft, tired. I nodded because nodding always seemed easier than explaining that it did mean something. even if she preferred to believe otherwise. Looking back now, I can see that the foundation of how they treated me was poured long before I had the language to understand it. They believed I was too much work, too different, too confusing. Being sent to live with Grandma was not framed as abandonment. It was framed as convenience. For them. Not for me. Grandma was the only person who ever tilted the world, so I did not feel sideways. Her house smelled like lemon soap and old books. Her cabinets were organized in ways that made sense to me. She did not force conversations. She let silence sit comfortably between us. She treated my small routines as natural parts of who I was. When I lined up my notebooks, she simply smiled and said that order was good for them. Soul. The memory of that kitchen, the warmth of the stove, the steady rhythm of her breathing across the room, returned to me as I sat on the guest bed in Spokane with the key in my hand. That storage unit in Boise, whatever was inside it, belonged to the only person who had ever made space for me without conditions. Of course she would choose something like that to leave behind. Not money in envelopes, not jewelry passed down generation by generation. She would choose something deliberate, something that required intention, something that rewarded the person who chose to look carefully instead of assuming. They already knew the truth. I sat there a long time listening to the rise and fall of voices in the other room. Their laughter had shifted into softer tones, comfortable again, now that the moment of discomfort had passed. They would forget the keys by tomorrow morning. They would remember the meal, the decorations, the plans for the rest of the winter, but they would not remember the look in my grandma's eyes when she placed that key on the table. I would remember it for all of us. Eventually, I stood and put the key inside my jacket pocket. My hand rested there a moment longer, feeling the cool edge of the metal. I knew without fully understanding why I needed to follow where this key led, not for the promise of $5 million. Not for revenge. Not for anything dramatic. I needed to follow it because it was the last thing she ever asked me to hold. As I turned off the bedroom light and stepped back into the hallway, I caught the faint sound of someone in the kitchen saying, "She is better off with Grandma, anyway." The voice was casual, dismissive, spoken with the same certainty people use when pointing out the weather. But the words landed with precision. They were familiar. They were old. They were the quiet truth underneath everything. I walked past the doorway without looking in. The key pressed against my leg with each step. It felt like the beginning of something I could not name yet, only sense. A direction. A weight. A place where my story had already decided to go, before I even realized I was moving. I kept walking down the hallway, my hand brushing against the key in my pocket, as if checking whether it was still there. The voices from the kitchen faded behind me, but the words lingered. Better off with Grandma. They floated beside me like shadows that had followed me my entire life. I stepped out the front door and breathed in the cold Spokane air, sharp enough to clear my head, but not sharp enough to quiet the feeling rising in my chest. It was not anger exactly. It was something colder, something steadier, a decision forming without fanfare. I did not stay the night. I told my mom I was heading out early, and she nodded with the distracted expression she used whenever emotions edged too close to the surface. My dad gave a small wave from the living room without turning away from the television. Neither asked why. Neither asked where I was going. That silence, oddly enough, made the choice easier. I drove back to my apartment, packed a single overnight bag, grabbed a travel mug of coffee, and got in my car. The key was tucked in the cup holder, catching the faint streetlight glow as I pulled out of the parking lot. It was not a dramatic departure. Nobody chased after me, nobody called. The world gave me no signs, no revelations, just a quiet sense of momentum that felt strangely comforting. The drive from Spokane to Boise takes about 7 hours if you do not stop much. I left before dawn. The highway was empty, wrapped in the kind of early morning darkness that feels more like a beginning than an ending. Snow lined the shoulders of the road in thin, pale strips. The radio played softly. I let my thoughts drift in and out like a tide. Every few miles, I reached for the key just to feel its shape in my hand. The closer I got to Boise, the more I remembered the years I spent living with Grandma. Her house had been just a few minutes from the storage district on the west side. I remember driving past rows of storage units with her when we ran errands. I never imagined she kept anything of importance in one. But then again, she had always been private in ways that made sense only after time had passed. I arrived in Boise just before noon. The sky was a pale winter blue, the kind that looks washed out, but honest. The storage facility sat behind a chain-link fence, not impressive or secretive or mysterious, just a flat stretch of small garage doors and numbered units. There was a little office to the right with a faded open sign. Nothing about the place looked like it could hide $5 million in value. Nothing about it suggested treasure or mystery, which made the whole thing more surreal. I parked, grabbed the key from the cup holder, and walked inside the office. A man in his 60s sat behind the counter, reading a newspaper. He looked up with a mild expression, the kind of man who had seen every type of customer and learned not to assume anything. "You must be here for Ruth Carlisle's unit?" His tone held no judgment, no curiosity. Simply fact. Her name caught me off guard for a moment, hearing it spoken by someone who knew her without knowing her the way I did. I nodded. Yes, I have the key. He gestured for it and examined the metal shape closely, almost ceremonially. Then he slid a clipboard toward me, asking for identification and a signature. As I filled out the form, he said something I did not expect. "You are the first one to show up. Thought I might see a crowd today." A crowd. Of course he expected that. Grandma had given keys to all of us, and if anyone had believed her, they would have beaten me here. But they did not believe her. They never believed her. The thought settled heavily in my chest. After everything was verified, the man stood. "My name is Paul Denner. I have been managing this place for years. Your grandma was one of the good ones. Quiet, paid on time, kept to herself. She asked me once what would happen if she left a key to more than one person. I told her whoever showed up first would be the one with access. Guess that was all she needed to hear." I followed him outside across the gravel lot. The air was crisp, the kind that makes your breath visible. He stopped in front of Unit 226 and tapped the metal door lightly. "This is it." Before he stepped back, he added softly, "She meant for someone to come." And someone did. He walked away, leaving me alone with the door. I held the key in my hand and felt a strange mixture of nerves and clarity. I inserted the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, as if the metal recognized its purpose. I pulled the door up slowly. The metal rattled and the sound echoed through the lot. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It was not the scent of dust or mold or anything forgotten. It smelled clean, like cedar and old paper, the way her house used to smell. Then the detail sharpened. The space was not filled with junk, not even close. Everything inside was arranged with deliberate care. Neat rows of labeled boxes stacked by size, shelves lined with binders and containers, wooden crates resting evenly along the back wall, each label written in her handwriting, steady and unmistakable. Nothing was random. Nothing was discarded. It felt more like stepping into a curated archive than a storage unit. I stood there for a long moment trying to understand what I was seeing. This was not the chaos I had been conditioned to expect from the way everyone dismissed her. This was my intention. This was a woman leaving a map behind for whoever cared enough to show up. I walked inside slowly. The concrete floor was cold, even through my shoes. My fingertips brushed the tops of the boxes as I passed them. Each label held a different part of her life. Photographs, letters, financial documents, keepsakes, receipts, manuals, journals. Everything stored carefully, preserved deliberately. I stopped at a wooden crate near the center of the unit. It was marked simply with one word. Personal. The lettering looked newer than the rest, as if she had written it not long before she passed. I did not open it, not yet. Instead, I let myself take in the space as a whole, the size of it, the quiet of it, the impossible neatness. It did not feel like a place meant to overwhelm. It felt like a place meant to reveal gradually, thoughtfully, in the way she always spoke when something mattered to her. This was not junk. This was not clutter. This was not the scattered leftovers of an aging woman losing track of her life. This was a blueprint, a story, A legacy built box by box. I realized then that the laughter around the table in Spokane had never been about the storage unit or its contents. The laughter had been about the idea that she could have built something organized and valuable outside their knowledge. The possibility that she had lived a life they did not participate in. The suggestion that she trusted someone other than them to understand what she left behind. And somehow, standing in that quiet, meticulously arranged room, I felt something shift even more clearly than it had the night before. The storage unit was not meant to impress anyone. It was meant to be found by the one person who listened. The one person who did not dismiss her. The one person who did not laugh. Me. I stepped further and saw the door still open behind me, letting in a narrow stream of winter light. Dust floated through the beam in soft, drifting patterns. The air felt warmer inside than it should have been. I took another breath and looked at the labels again, feeling a sense of direction forming. She left all of this for a reason. If the others had bothered to open their eyes, they might have understood her better. But they had given up their chance. They let their keys slip out of their hands without a second thought. I reached forward and rested my hand on the personal crate. The wood was smooth, recently polished. Whatever came next would start here, with whatever she wanted me to see first. I leaned down slightly, fingers finding the edge of the lid. Then I paused, not out of fear, but out of the quiet understanding that crossing this threshold would change them. The shape of what I thought I knew about her, and maybe even about myself. The winter light shifted behind me and stretched across the floor as if marking the moment. I straightened my back, took one more breath, and stepped fully into the unit, ready to see what she had trusted only me to find. I slid my fingers under the edge of the crate lid and lifted it slowly, half expecting dust to rise or old paper to crumble at the touch. Nothing like that happened. The lid came up smoothly, almost quietly, as if the crate had been opened recently. Winter light reached inside and spilled across the top layer of what was inside. At first I thought I was looking at someone else's belongings, because none of it made sense in the context of my own life. Then my eyes adjusted and the shapes sharpened, and there was no mistaking it. Everything in that crate was mine. The top folder held school records, actual printed documents, report cards from elementary school, discipline notes, conference summaries, speech therapy assessments, reading evaluations. There were sticky notes on some of the pages written in her careful handwriting. Progress here. Be patient. She needs time. The words looked as fresh as if she had written them yesterday, not decades ago. I had never seen these records before. My mom always said she misplaced things, and my dad said the schools kept their own copies, so why worry? But here they were, every year. Every detail. Preserved because someone had decided I mattered enough to keep track of. I picked up the next item, a photograph from what must have been my 8th birthday. We had celebrated it at my parents' house that year, the only birthday of mine that was ever held there. In the picture, I was sitting at the end of a long table with a cake in front of me. My face looked uncertain, caught between wanting to smile and wanting to disappear. In the background, Jonah and the others were already wandering away. I remembered that party as a blur of noise and confusion. I did not know she had taken a picture. The photograph was crisp, the edges protected in a plastic sleeve. Under the photo was a smaller envelope. Inside it were hand-drawn birthday cards in my own childish handwriting. Some were crooked, some were smudged. All of them were addressed to Grandma. She had kept every one. I remember giving them to her, thinking they were nothing special, just construction paper and markers. But she saved them like they were worth something. I kept digging, though digging is not the right word, because everything was organized in layers. I lifted another folder and found copies of my earliest art projects. I felt a strange stillness move through my chest. I recognized each drawing, even though I had not seen them in years. A house with a crooked roof. A sun with too many rays. A line of people drawn without hands because I never understood how to place them. My mom used to throw artwork away after a few days because she hated clutter. She said I needed to learn that not every piece of paper deserved to be kept, but Grandma kept them. All of them. There was another folder beneath the drawings. This one felt heavier. Inside were medical documents, evaluations, notes from specialists, letters between professionals. Some of the printouts had highlighter marks in different colors. Blue for questions she had asked, yellow for things she wanted to follow up on, pink for items she disagreed with. I suddenly remembered how she used to carry a small notebook in her purse when I was a kid, writing things down after appointments. She was always more prepared than the people who were supposed to know what they want, what we're talking about. One sheet caught my eye. It was a letter from a pediatric behavioral specialist. The words were clinical, detached, and somehow still stinging, even after all these years. The recommendation, printed near the bottom in bold, said that in high-stress households, rehoming or a temporary placement with extended family might serve the child better. Rehoming. The word made my throat tighten in the strange way it does when something old gets pulled sharply into the present. Under that paper was something I had never seen and never expected. A packet from an adoption agency. Not completed, not filed, but started. My name is typed at the top. Questions partially filled in by someone. Notes in the margins in my mom's handwriting. It was dated the year I turned 6. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to feel something sharp or fiery. Nothing came. Just that cold clarity again. The kind that feels like stepping into water deeper than you expected. They really did not know what to do with me, and they had thought about giving me away. I kept reading. At the bottom of the packet was a sticky note. The handwriting was not my mom's. It was Grandma's. It said simply, they didn't know what to do with her. So I did. The calmness of the message made it heavier rather than lighter. There was no anger in the words, no resentment, just the truth. And truth, when spoken softly, tends to land harder. I did not cry. My hands did not shake. If anything, I was surprised by how steady they were. The childhood version of me might have broken open. The adult version felt something else entirely. Not pain, not disbelief, recognition. I closed the adoption packet gently and set it aside. Beneath it was a stack of letters tied with a thin ribbon. The knot looked recent. I undid it carefully. Inside were letters I had written to her when I lived briefly with my parents again, during high school. Letters I did not remember writing. Some were short, a few lines about school or schedules. Others were longer. Apologies for not visiting enough. Questions about how she was doing. Notes about things I found confusing or hard to talk about. She had kept every one, organized by year, dated by her own handwriting on the top corner. As I kept turning through the crate, each layer felt like stepping further into a version of my life that had been preserved intentionally. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. She had taken all the pieces everyone else dismissed and built a quiet archive out of them. An archive of a child who tried, who struggled, who asked questions, who felt lost more often than she ever said out loud. An archive nobody else wanted to look at. Halfway down the crate was a journal. At first, I did not know whose it was. The cover was plain brown, worn smooth by handling. When I opened it, I recognized her handwriting immediately. The first entry was dated the week I came to live with her. She wrote about how I sat in the backseat of her car holding a stuffed bear like a life raft. She wrote about how I apologized for taking up space before she even shut the door. She wrote about how much it hurt to see a child already believing she was an inconvenience. Entry after entry documented moments I had forgotten. My first day in her house, and how I stood in the doorway unsure whether I was allowed to sit on the couch. The time she took me to a small bookstore and I followed her so closely she bumped into me twice. The day she realized that silence was not my fear response, but my thinking response. She knew me. Really know me. She did not try to fix me. She simply wrote down the map so she could walk beside me. Near the bottom of one page, she had written something that made the room feel suddenly smaller. If I do not keep these pieces of her life, they will vanish. She deserves to be seen. Not loudly, just truthfully. It was not dramatic. It was not poetic. It was just her way of stating what she believed, and reading it made something inside me settle in place. Not comfort, not sadness, more like alignment. I closed the journal and placed it back carefully. I reached into the crate again and found a small, pocket-sized photo album. Inside were pictures of me taken over the years. Photos I never knew existed. In some I was smiling. In others I looked serious, focused, lost in my own world. In one picture, I was sitting on the porch steps drawing shapes in chalk. She had written a note on the back. She sees things differently. That is not a flaw. It is a doorway. I let out a slow breath. The storage unit felt strangely warm. Or maybe that was simply the feeling of being surrounded by pieces of a truth I had never been allowed to fully see. I looked around at the rest of the boxes, papers, keepsakes, memories someone had decided were worth preserving. My family had mocked all of this without knowing what existed here. They had dismissed the woman who collected these pieces as if she were confused or forgetful. But she had been neither. She had been methodical, thoughtful, intentional. The unit felt like a room built for one purpose: to show me the parts of my life that had not been erased, the parts that had been quietly protected while everyone else was busy looking away. I stood up slowly and scanned the shelves again. That was when I noticed the envelope. It sat on a middle shelf, sealed, heavy, marked with her handwriting. Unlike the other labels, this one did not describe its contents. It had only a single line: "For her, when the time is right." The seal was unbroken. The paper felt thick and important, the way legal documents feel even before you know what they hold. I reached toward it, then stopped, my fingers hovering just above the edge. Whatever was inside had been waiting for me longer than I realized, and opening it felt like the next step in a path she had planned long before I ever knew there was one. I lowered my hand without picking it up. Not yet. I needed a moment to breathe in this room full of truths before touching the one she had sealed specifically for me. The winter light reached further across the floor, catching the corner of the envelope. It waited quietly, and so did I. I stood there with my hand hovering over the sealed envelope, the winter light stretching a thin, pale line across its surface. It felt different from everything else in the unit. Not sentimental, not archival. This one carried weight. It carried intention. It carried something meant for me, and only me. I let the silence settle before I finally reached for it. The paper was thick and smooth, the way formal documents usually feel. My name was written in her handwriting across the front. No flourish, no decoration, just clarity. I broke the seal carefully. The sound it made was small but final, like stepping through a doorway you cannot step back out of. Inside was a stack of papers folded in thirds. The first sheet was a handwritten note from her. I recognized her lettering immediately, each stroke deliberate. "If you are reading this, it means you came. I knew you would. You have always looked closely at what others ignore. That is your gift, even when they try to convince you it is a flaw. This unit is not the end of anything. It is the beginning of your freedom." The words made my chest tighten in a way I did not expect. She had always spoken to me like she trusted me to understand things beyond my age. Seeing that trust in ink made it real in a different way. I let the note rest against my leg while I unfolded the next page. It was a letter from an attorney. Her name was typed neatly at the top: Lydia Rowan, attorney at law, Boise, Idaho. The date was from earlier that year. The heading made my heart stutter for a moment. Final directive regarding distribution of personal assets. I read each line slowly, careful not to miss anything. I, Ruth Carlisle, hereby state that the contents of Storage Unit 226, located at West Boise Self-Storage, are to be transferred in full to the first individual who enters the unit using the key provided to them. Valid claims must be made within 48 hours of initial entry. Upon confirmation of entry and identity by the property manager, the beneficiary will receive a check in the amount of $5 million issued from my personal trust and deposited directly into the beneficiary's verified bank account. The number might as well have been written on fire. $5 million. My family had mocked the idea of anything valuable in that unit. They had thrown away the keys without hesitation. And the entire time, this document had been waiting inside a box they would have never bothered to open. There was more. A paragraph explaining why she structured it that way. She wanted the person who received her assets to be someone who took her seriously, someone who listened without arrogance, someone who showed up. The key was a test, but not a cruel one. It was a question disguised as metal. A question only one person answered. I turned the page again. Attached to the directive was a typed instruction sheet for claiming the benefit. Contact information for the attorney. A line that said proof of entry time must be logged by the property manager. And then a final sentence, handwritten by Lydia herself. I met your grandmother many times. She trusted you. Please call me when you are ready. My pulse picked up in a strange rhythm, not panic, not excitement. Something steadier, a sense that my life had just pivoted without warning and the ground had tilted, slightly beneath my feet. I reached into my bag for my phone and stepped closer to the open unit door, letting the cold air clear my head before dialing. The number rang twice before a calm voice answered. This is Lydia Rowan. I swallowed and spoke. Hi. My grandmother was Ruth Carlyle. My name is Eden. I think I am supposed to contact you. There was a pause on her end, but not a surprised one, more like she had been expecting the call. Eden, thank you for reaching out. I am glad you found the envelope. Have you accessed the storage unit already? Yes, I am standing inside it now. Then we are within the time frame. I need to verify your identity and log the moment of entry. Did the property manager confirm you were the first to arrive? Yes. His name is Paul. He said nobody else had shown up. Good. That will matter for the formal record. Do you have a government-issued ID with you? I will need you to scan and email a copy. I told her I did, and she walked me through the steps. She was clear and direct, not unkind, but efficient, the way attorneys often sound when dealing with complicated instructions. After I sent the documents, she asked me to confirm the exact time I opened the unit. I checked my phone. It had been 20 minutes earlier. All right, she said. That means your 48-hour claim period has officially begun. Once the trust receives confirmation from the bank, the check will be issued. The deposit may appear as pending while the verification completes. It will not clear instantaneously. Do you understand? I nodded even though she could not see me. Yes, I understand. There was a slight shift in her tone. Your grandmother spoke highly of you. She planned this carefully. She wanted the process to protect you from interference. That is why the rules are this strict. If anyone attempts to contest your claim, they will have no legal standing. Hearing that felt both grounding and surreal. My family had abandoned their keys without hesitation. They had mocked the idea of $5 million as if the concept itself offended them. And now there was a legal document stating clearly that whoever opened the unit first was the sole beneficiary. Thank you, I said quietly. I mean it. You are welcome, she replied. Call me if anyone contacts you, or if you need support. And Eden, take your time with whatever you find in that unit. It is more than an inheritance. It is a message. The call ended. I lowered the phone slowly and let her words settle. The wind outside rattled the chain-link fence. The storage unit was silent except for my breath. I looked back at the document. The rules were simple. I had opened the unit. I had made the claim. I had 48 hours to complete the rest. After that, the $5 million would legally belong to me. The thought did not feel like winning. It felt like standing in a doorway between two versions of my life. One familiar, one not. I sat down on the small step inside the unit and let myself process it. My family had been given the same opportunity. They had held the same key. They had mocked it, dismissed it, and thrown it away. They never even considered that Grandma might have done something intentional. They never believed she could make a choice without their approval. They never believed she could build anything valuable in secret. They did not open the envelope. They did not open the door. They did not open their minds to the possibility that she meant exactly what she said. He said. I folded the documents back into the envelope and placed it carefully on top of a nearby box. Then I pulled out my phone again and logged into my bank app. My checking account stared back at me with its usual unimpressive balance, a number that barely covered my rent and groceries most months. I refreshed the page once. Nothing changed. I refreshed again out of habit. Still nothing. Then I remembered what Lydia had said. The deposit would come as pending first, after verification. It would not appear instantly. It would take time. Hours, maybe. A day. That was fine. After the life I had lived, Waiting 48 hours felt like nothing. I had waited years to feel seen. I could wait a little longer for the money that had been waiting for me. I stood and walked back toward the crate of documents. I touched the edge of the wood again. The crate no longer felt like an emotional weight. It felt like history. Mine. Preserved because one person cared enough to hold on to it. I stepped outside the unit again and looked toward the office. Paul was sitting by the window sipping coffee from a thermos. When he noticed me, he gave a nod as if to say he understood something had shifted, even if he did not. You know what? Maybe he did. People who manage storage units often know the quiet truths families leave behind. I walked back inside and pulled the metal door halfway down, letting it hover above my head. The air felt heavier with expectation. I took a slow breath and told myself not to rush, not to panic, not to overthink. Grandma had planned this for me. She had planned it knowing exactly how the family would react. She knew who would show up. She knew who would not. I closed the door fully and heard the lock click into place. It sounded like the start of something, not the end. The 48-hour clock had begun, and I could feel its presence the way you feel a storm before it forms. A quiet pressure in the air. I drove to a small motel on the edge of Boise, checked into a room that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, and set my bag down on the bed. My phone buzzed twice as I plugged it in. Unknown numbers. I ignored them. I showered, changed into clean clothes, and sat by the window while steam drifted through the bathroom door. Then my phone rang again. This time it buzzed with the vibration pattern I had assigned to family calls. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. And again. 6 calls in under 5 minutes. I stared at the screen as it lit up with my mom's name, then Jonah's, then Colin's, then my dad's number, which he never used unless something significant was happening. A part of me already knew what this was about. News travels fast in families, even the kind of news they once dismissed as nonsense. I picked up the phone on the 7th call, partly out of curiosity and partly because the ringing had become its own kind of name. Pressure. My mom's voice hit me immediately, rushed and breathless. Where are you? Did you go to Boise? Did you open the unit? She did not ask if I was safe or if everything was all right. Just the unit. Just the possibility of what they now feared they had thrown away. I answered honestly. I used the key. Silence snapped across the line. A sharp inhale. Then her voice rose in a way I had not heard since childhood. You did what? You used your key. You opened it. Yes. I said it calmly, almost clinically, as if confirming an appointment. I used the key Grandma gave me. She exhaled shakily. I could hear movement in the background. A door slamming, someone raising their voice. Then Jonah's voice shouted something unintelligible. My mom covered the speaker for a second, muffling the noise. When she came back, her voice was tight. Stay there. Do not do anything until we figure out what is going on. Do you understand? I almost laughed at the phrasing. They did not care what I did 2 days ago. But now they wanted control. Now they wanted management. Now they wanted compliance. Before I could respond, my dad's voice replaced hers. It was rare for him to take the phone so quickly. His voice was tense, the kind that comes from realizing a mistake long after it is too late to hide it. Did you sign anything? Did you talk to anyone? Eden, answer me. I kept my tone steady. Yes, I talked to her attorney. I filed the claim. They confirmed I am within the time frame. There was another pause, a heavy one. Then my dad swore under his breath, the kind of curse he only used when something significant slipped beyond his control. In the background, I could hear drawers opening and closing. People move quickly. The sound of something falling. Mom shouted, "Check the trash. Check everything. It has to be here somewhere." Her words were not meant for me, but I heard them anyway. The key. They were looking for the keys they had tossed aside with such certainty. The realization washed through me in a cold, steady wave. They had gone from laughter to panic in less than 1 day. The change was not subtle. It was frantic, desperate. I listened as the chaos in the house grew louder. Someone said they found one of the little gift bags Grandma had handed out, but it was empty. Someone else said they remembered throwing it out. Then Jonah's voice cut through everything. The trash truck came this morning, early. Everything is gone. The room on their end exploded into shouting. I sat in the motel chair watching the snowdrift outside the window. The distance between us felt both literal and emotional. I could picture them digging through the nearly empty kitchen trash bin, then rushing outside only to find the curb already cleared. I had grown up in that house. I knew how unprepared they were for the consequences. My dad came back on the phone line. His voice was controlled in the way men sound when they are trying not to panic. "Eden, why did you go there without telling us?" I let the question sit for a moment, feeling its shape. It was not a question. It was an accusation. Blame. A rewrite of events to suit a narrative they preferred. "She gave me a key," I said. That was enough for me. He exhaled sharply. "You should have waited. This is a family matter. You should have let us handle it." Handle what I thought, but did not say. The same way they handled my childhood. With avoidance. With indifference. With passive decisions disguised as helplessness. Instead, I said, "You all had keys, too." That sentence hung in the air. A simple line, not designed to wound, but it landed with precision because it was true. Because it mattered. Because it exposed the reality they did not want to acknowledge. They had the same opportunity. They threw it away. Literally. My mom's voice barged in again. "Do you know what you have done? Do you have any idea what this means?" She sounded distraught, but not in the way people sound when they are heartbroken. This was a financial panic, possibilities slipping through fingers that had never bothered to grasp it. I kept my voice level. Grandma set the rules. I followed them. The noise in the background intensified. Chair scraping. Someone is crying. Someone shouting that this was unfair. Someone else said to calm down. The sound of a door slamming so hard it rattled through the speaker. My dad spoke again, quieter this time. "You need to come back. We need to talk about this in person." I placed my hand on the motel desk, grounding myself. "Dad, there is nothing to talk about. The claim is already filed." He said my name in that restrained way he used when trying not to escalate. "Eden, this is a lot of money. You should not rush into anything. We should handle this as a group. Your grandmother probably meant this for all of us." That line almost made me laugh. The idea of them standing together as a unified group, claiming a shared inheritance they had mocked just days earlier. The idea that they believed they knew Grandma's intentions better than the person Grandma had trusted to show up. I said nothing. Silence filled the line until my dad sighed heavily. Then he said it. The sentence that revealed more truth than he intended. "We did not know she was serious." That was it. That was the heart of the matter. They never believed she was serious about anything that did not revolve around them. They never believed her quiet choices had weight. They never believed she would choose someone else. Their panic was not about losing money. It was about realizing she had acted with intention, and they had missed it entirely. The shouting resumed again as someone else grabbed the phone. Colin this time. His voice was sharp, almost frantic. "Did you find anything? Did you see anything there? Is the money real? Tell me what you saw." I leaned back in the chair. Everything inside the unit was organized. It was nothing like what you all thought. He swore loudly. Then he said something that was not meant for me. "Find the bag. She must have hidden my key in another bag. She must have." Another voice cut in. "Jonah." His tone was high and panicked. "I threw it out. I know I threw it out. God, I threw it out." There was commotion again, the kind of frantic scrambling that comes from realizing a mistake too late to undo. I pictured them overturning couch cushions, pulling open drawers, shaking out jackets, searching for something they already knew was gone. The keys were sitting in a landfill by then, buried under coffee grounds and cardboard boxes. My mom came back on the line, her voice tight with panic. "Eden, you need to tell us everything, right now. If you opened the unit before any of us, we need to find a way to fix this. We need to talk to the attorney. Maybe there is a misunderstanding. Maybe she meant the first family member to claim it together." I closed my eyes for a moment. The desperation in her voice was real, but so was the truth. They had mocked the keys. They had called Grandma senile. They had labeled her belongings as trash, and now they wanted to reshape the rules to fit their regret. I answered plainly. "I followed the instructions she left, that is all." There was a stunned silence. Then my mom said the words she always fell back on when things slipped beyond her. Control. This is unbelievable. For once, I agreed with her, but not for the same reasons. The voices on the other end turned loud again, arguing, blaming, crying. At one point, someone insisted on calling the city waste department, demanding to know if the trash truck could return. Another asked if the landfill accepted visitors. Someone else said to check the neighbors' bins in case they mixed the bags. The panic had reached a level I had never heard from them. I held the phone slightly away from my ear. I could hear everything, but none of it required my participation. Their frenzy moved like a storm through the house, loud and chaotic. But it did not touch me. Not the way it once would have. They were scrambling for keys they had thrown away. They were racing to undo a moment they had dismissed without thought. They were trying to reclaim a chance they had wasted. And I sat quietly in a motel chair, listening, not saying a word. Eventually, the noise blurred into one long wave of arguing. My name was called a few times, but I let the phone rest in my hand without raising it back to my ear. The truth was simple. They were fighting each other. Not me. When the chaos on the other end grew into overlapping shouts, I finally lowered the phone to my lap. I did not hang up. I simply listened. It felt important to hear it for a moment. Not out of spite, not for satisfaction, but for clarity. This was what happened when laughter met reality, when arrogance collided with consequence, when dismissal turned into desperation. Their voices rose and crashed like waves hitting a cliff. I sat still. And for the first time in a long time, I did not feel like the unstable one in the family. I let the noise continue until it became one indistinguishable roar. Then I slowly pressed the phone against my chest, the screen glowing faintly. I stayed like that, phone pressed against my chest, listening to the chaos on the other end until it finally dissolved into a kind of exhausted silence. No resolution. No clarity, just stunned breathing and the hollow echo of a family realizing the ground had shifted beneath them. When the call finally dropped, I did not call back. I placed the phone on the nightstand, lay back on the motel bed, and let the quiet settle over me like a heavy blanket. It was the first quiet I had felt since stepping into the storage unit. By morning, the quiet was gone. The first message arrived at 8:17 in the morning. A text from my mom. We need to discuss legal options. You acted before everyone had a chance. That line sat on my screen like a stone. Then another from Jonah. You tricked us. You knew something. Then Colin, a long paragraph filled with frantic accusations, sharp words thrown like darts in search of a target. I read them all without responding. At 8:49 in the morning, the motel front desk called my room. A young woman with a nervous voice said someone had come by asking for me. She did not let them through. I thanked her and packed my things quickly. I checked out 30 minutes later, drove to a bakery on Vista Avenue, and sat in my car with a coffee while the messages continued to roll in. I kept waiting for the anger to overwhelm me. It did not. What I felt was something colder, something that resembled clarity. Their panic was not about wanting fairness. It was about losing control. They had mocked the idea of value until the value proved to be real. They had tossed their keys aside until the possibility of $5 million grew teeth. Around noon, the next shift arrived. An email from a law firm. The subject line read, Notice of intent to file claim regarding estate assets. I opened it and scanned the first few lines. The claimants were listed. My mom, my dad, Colin, and Jonah. They were alleging misconduct. They claimed I manipulated an elderly woman, that I misrepresented myself, that I had taken advantage of her mental state. The letter used phrases designed to provoke doubt. Undue influence, questionable capacity, fraudulent procurement. I sat back in my car and let the words settle. Not because I believed them, but because I recognized them. They were not legal terms aimed at truth. They were survival tactics, attempts to rewrite history before it hardened into fact. I forwarded the email to Lydia, then called her. She answered on the first ring. I figured you would contact me today, she said calmly. How are you holding up? I exhaled slowly. They are threatening legal action. I assumed they might. Let me pull up the document. I listened to the faint clicking of her keyboard through the phone. Her voice remained completely steady, which helped me keep my own steady. They have no standing. she said finally. Her voice did not waver. Under Idaho trust law, the directive is binding. The distribution was structured intentionally. Your grandmother had full capacity at the time these documents were drafted. You followed every required step. The claim is yours. They may try to file something symbolic, but it will be dismissed. Her certainty washed over me like warm water on cold skin. What do? I asked. It was not fear behind the question. It was a calculation, understanding what steps would come next. Right now, nothing. Do not reply to them directly. Let me handle the correspondence. If they file, we will respond. Any competent judge will recognize this for what it is. Panic and regret. I swallowed. There was a strange comfort in hearing the situation distilled so cleanly. Panic and regret. That was exactly what it was. Nothing more. Thank you, I told her. Truly. You are welcome, she said. And Eden, remember something. People often become their truest selves when they think money has slipped through their fingers. Do not let their behavior rewrite your memories. Your grandmother's intentions were clear. After the call ended, I set my phone on the passenger seat and stared out the windshield. Boise traffic moved slowly in front of me. A woman walked her dog along the sidewalk. A teenager skateboarded past the bakery window. Life continued with its ordinary rhythm, even as mine was being tugged sharply in a direction I had not foreseen. By late afternoon, another message arrived, this time formal. They had filed. The county clerk's office emailed me an electronic copy of the petition. I sat in my car reading line after line of accusations, each one framed in the driest legal language, but all of them echoing the same sentiment. I had taken something they believed belonged to them. Never mind that they had thrown it away. Never mind that they had dismissed its value. Never mind that Grandma had set the rules. They wanted what they had lost, and they were willing to twist themselves into knots to justify their attempt to reclaim it. I drove to the courthouse the next morning. Lydia met me in the parking lot, a small leather portfolio tucked under her arm. She was shorter than I expected, with sharp eyes and an expression that radiated competence more than warmth. That suited me just fine. She shook my hand. I have reviewed their petition. It is poorly constructed, emotionally driven. No actual evidence. They are trying to imply misconduct where there is none. I nodded, my heart beating steadily rather than quickly. I expected to be nervous. Instead, I felt something close to relief. The truth was finally stepping into daylight. As we walked into the lobby, she glanced at me. They will likely try to unsettle you. They may raise their voices. They may accuse you of things that feel personal. Do not respond emotionally. Answer only what is asked. You are on solid ground here. The courtroom was smaller than I imagined. Rows of wooden benches. A judge's bench was raised on a short platform, sunlight filtering through tall windows. My family sat on the left side. The moment I entered, all their heads turned toward me. My mom looked distraught, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. My dad wore an expression I had not seen before, something between frustration and disbelief. Colin glared openly. Jonah shook his head as if I had betrayed him personally. None of them said my name. None of them asked if I was all right. Their faces carried the unmistakable look of people who believed something had been stolen from them. Lydia guided me to the opposite side of the room. Sit straight. Breathe evenly. Do not react unless asked. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Everyone sat. The proceedings began. My mom's attorney went first. He spoke with rehearsed indignation, using phrases meant to provoke sympathy. Vulnerable elders. Manipulative behavior. Suspicious timing. He sounded confident until the judge interrupted him with a single question. Where is your evidence of undue influence? The attorney faltered. He shuffled papers. He gestured vaguely toward the family. My daughter would never have acted this way unless she knew something, my mom blurted. Her voice cracked. She is taking advantage of a loophole. The judge raised a hand. That is enough. This court deals in facts, not assumptions. My mom sat down hard, her shoulders trembling. Jonah muttered something I could not make out. Colin crossed his arms so tightly his knuckles turned white. Then Lydia rose from her seat. She stood calm and composed, the kind of composed that comes from absolute certainty. Your Honor, she began, Mrs. Carlyle left clear directives before her passing. They were written and executed while she retained full mental capacity. She chose this method of inheritance intentionally and discussed it with me in detail long before her death. She distributed identical keys to multiple family members. Only one person made the effort to use the key and claim the contents of the own storage unit. Under the terms of her trust, that effort is what triggers allocation. Her instructions were deliberate, lawful, and binding. And most importantly, they reflect her unmistakable intent. Every word she spoke was true. But hearing it laid out so plainly, officially, in a room where people had spent weeks calling me manipulative and confused, felt like someone placing a steady hand on my back. A quiet confirmation that I had not imagined any of it, that I had followed the path my grandma set for me exactly as she meant it to be followed. The judge considered both sides. Then he asked a final question. Did any claimant other than the beneficiary open the storage unit? There was a heavy silence before my family answered in a reluctant unison. No. Then the judge nodded. The petition is dismissed. The gavel hit the block with a dull, firm sound. Final. Clear. Irreversible. A breath escaped my chest before I even realized I had been holding it. Lydia placed a hand lightly on my arm. That is the end of this part, she said softly. Let's go. As we walked out, I glanced once more at my family. They were gathered together, whispering sharply, their faces tight with disbelief. They did not look at me. Or maybe they refused to. Outside the courthouse, cold sunlight stretched across the steps. People hurried in and out. Life continued, indifferent to the outcome of our small storm. Lydia walked beside me with her portfolio tucked under her arm. There may be more noise from them, she said, but legally they have no power left here. I nodded, breathing in the cold air until my lungs steadied. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel proud. What I felt was the quiet before another shift, a sense that something else was coming. Another ripple in the path ahead. I stood there at the top of the courthouse steps, hands in my jacket pockets, the cold sunlight settling on my shoulders without warming anything underneath. For a moment, I let myself believe the worst was over. The petition had been dismissed. The law had spoken. But I should have known my family would not let the ground stop shaking just because a judge told them to sit down. The next morning, Lydia called. Her voice was calm but purposeful. There will be a hearing, not a trial. A clarification hearing. They requested it, and the court granted it. I closed my eyes, letting the reality settle. Of course they did. They are hoping the judge missed something, Lydia continued, or that new information might sway the court. It will not. But we need to attend. When? Tomorrow morning at 9. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat at the small desk in my motel room, staring at the faint reflection of myself on the blank television screen. I looked tired, but not undone. The kind of tiredness that comes from walking farther than you planned, not from falling. I reminded myself of something Grandma had once told me when I was 11. I worried I had failed a math test. Sometimes the world gets loud, right before it goes quiet again. The next morning, I arrived at the courthouse early. The sky was pale, the kind of washed-out winter blue that never fully commits to sunlight. Lydia met me inside. She carried the same small portfolio, her expression focused. You do not need to speak unless directly addressed, she said quietly as we walked toward the courtroom. Just breathe and stay grounded. Your grandmother protected you with every detail of her plan. Remember that. The courtroom was fuller this time. My family occupied the whole left bench. My mom had red, tired eyes. My dad looked like he had not slept. Colin sat rigid, jaw clenched. Jonah stared straight ahead with a look of forced confidence, the kind a person puts on when panic sits close under their skin. Their attorney stood in front of them reviewing notes. He looked more composed than they did, but even from across the room I could see the strain in the set of his shoulders. Lydia and I sat at our table. The air felt dense with preparation. At exactly 9, the judge entered. Everyone rose. Everyone sat. The attorney cleared his throat and stepped forward. Your Honor, he began. New concerns have arisen regarding the distribution of Mrs. Carlyle's assets. It is our position that the beneficiary acted prematurely and without proper consideration of the deceased's intent. We request that the court reevaluate the validity of the 48-hour condition. The judge nodded once. Proceed. He launched into an explanation, one that leaned heavily on emotional interpretation rather than legal foundation. He argued that the deceased's age should be considered, that distributing keys at a family gathering was ambiguous, that the rule of whoever arrived first did not reflect a fair or equitable division of assets, that the family believed the storage unit contained nothing of value, and therefore, their dismissal of the keys was understandable. It was a strange thing listening to a person try to reshape reality in real time. He spoke with polished phrasing, but underneath it, I could hear the same sentiment I had heard on the phone. Regret disguised as indignation. Panic disguised as fairness. Entitlement disguised as concern. When he finished, the judge turned to Lydia. Ms. Rowan. She stood, letting the silence breathe for just a moment before she began. Your Honor, the deceased made her intentions unmistakably clear. She executed a formal directive through my office. She confirmed her mental capacity during every step of the process. She chose to distribute her assets to the individual who demonstrated initiative and respect for her instructions. This was not impulsive. It was not careless. It was not ambiguous. It was deliberate. She lifted a sheet of paper, her voice even and precise. The directive states that the person who opens the unit using a distributed key must file a claim within 48 hours. This condition was written by Mrs. Carlyle herself and witnessed properly. The key distribution was intentional. The time frame was intentional. The requirement of initiative was intentional. My client followed every step correctly. No other individual made any attempt to open the unit or contact my office. The judge nodded slightly, processing. Lydia continued. The opposing party argues that the conditions were unfair, but fairness is subjective. Legality is not. The deceased had every right to structure her trust as she wished. The keys were equal opportunity. That the family discarded them does not create grounds for legal intervention. My mom suddenly leaned forward, speaking without permission. She tricked us. She made it sound like nothing. The judge held up a hand. Ma'am, you will have a chance to speak, but you must wait until you are recognized. My mom sat back, visibly shaking. The judge turned to their attorney. You may call your clients if you believe testimony will support your claim. The attorney nodded, gesturing for my dad to stand. He approached the witness stand. For a moment, he looked at me. Not long enough to mean something, just long enough to confirm he was avoiding my eyes on purpose. After swearing in, he settled into the chair. The attorney asked, Did you believe the key your mother-in-law gave you held any real value? My dad shook his head. No. She was 90. She had been forgetting things. She liked making dramatic gestures. We thought it was sentimental, not serious. And did she at any time tell you this key was part of a legal financial committee? Distribution. No. Never. The attorney nodded as if scoring a point. And when you realized the unit contained assets worth several $1 million, how did you react? My dad hesitated. We were shocked. Confused. It did not make sense. The attorney stepped aside. Your Honor, this is the crux of the issue. The family did not understand the implications of the key. They believed it to be symbolic. They did not knowingly forfeit an inheritance. The judge looked at Lydia again. Would you like to question the witness? Yes, Your Honor. She stood and walked a few steps closer. Mr. Lawson, she said calmly, did your mother-in-law ever tell you the key was worthless? He frowned. No, she just handed them out. Did you ask her what it meant? No. Did you open the storage unit? No. Did you attempt to? No. Did you call my office within 48 hours of receiving the key? No, she nodded. And yet my client did. She paused, letting the weight of that simple contrast settle in the air. Nothing further. My dad looked relieved to step down, but the relief did not last. The judge gestured to Jonah next. He approached with forced confidence. When asked whether he opened the unit, he answered quickly, No. Did you attempt to? Lydia asked. No. Did you keep your key? His face flushed. Number 1, I threw it out. Why? Because it was junk. His voice cracked as he said it. Lydia raised one eyebrow. Understood. It went like that for each of them. The key questions were simple. Did you open the unit? Did you try? Did you keep the key? Every answer was some version of no. By the time Colin finished his testimony, the courtroom had fallen into an uneasy stillness. The attorney looked increasingly deflated. My family looked increasingly desperate. The judge folded his hands. I have reviewed the directive thoroughly. It is lawful and clear. The deceased had full authority to create conditions for the distribution of her assets. She acted intentionally. The key requirement was explicit. The 48-hour time frame was explicit. The beneficiary complied. No one else made any effort to do so. He looked at my family. You did not open the unit. You did not attempt to claim the contents. You did not retain the key. You cannot contest what you voluntarily relinquished. My mom stood abruptly. But we did not know. We thought it was a joke. How can that be binding? The judge's voice softened, but his words did not. You were given equal opportunity. Disbelief is not a legal defense. The law cannot protect people from their own assumptions. She sank back into her seat, tears slipping down her face. For a moment, I felt something twist inside me. Not guilt, not satisfied, just the pain of recognizing that consequences often arrive long after the moment that caused them. The judge continued, This court finds no grounds to challenge the directive. The petition is dismissed with finality. The assets in the storage unit, including all associated financial distributions, belong solely to the claimant. He looked directly at me. Ms. Eden Lawson, ownership of the unit and all its contents is yours. His gavel struck the block with a sound that settled deeper than I expected. A sound that felt like the closing of a door and the opening of another. My family sat frozen. No shouting this time. No dramatic exit. Just silence. Heavy. Absolute. A silence that seemed to stretch across every year they had overlooked me. Every moment they had dismissed her. Every opportunity they had thrown away. Lydia touched my arm lightly. We are done here. As we walked toward the courtroom doors, I heard my mom whisper something. Not loud. Not meant for me. But I heard it anyway. How did this happen? Her attorney answered quietly. She showed up. None of you did. The hallway outside felt brighter, colder, more real than the courtroom. People passed us carrying papers, talking about unrelated cases. Life moved on without pausing for our storm. I stepped out into the daylight, breathing in air that felt sharper than before. The courthouse doors closed behind me with a solid thud. The storage unit, the inheritance, the truth. All of it belonged to me now. And for the first time since this began, the path ahead felt entirely my own. The cold air outside the courthouse still clung to my jacket when Lydia turned to me and said something that shifted everything again. Now that you are the legal owner of the unit and all associated assets, we need to discuss the outstanding debts. I frowned, unsure what she meant. Your grandmother kept meticulous financial records, she continued. Several family members borrowed money from her over the years. Some of those amounts were significant. As her legal heir, those debts now belong to you. We walked slowly toward the parking lot as she spoke, her words steady and organized, the way she always delivered information she knew might bruise before it clarified. I remembered the stacks of documents in the storage unit, the neatly labeled folders, the files of old checks and notes written in Grandma's tidy handwriting. She had saved everything, including the promises they never intended to keep. Lydia unlocked her car and pulled a thin folder from the back seat. She handed it to me. Inside were photocopies of loan agreements, informal promissory notes, and bank transfer confirmations. The numbers stared back at me like old ghosts, finally catching up. My dad owed $22,000. My mom owed $8,000. Jonah owed $14,000. Colin owed nearly $10,000, all written in my grandmother's hand. All marked unpaid. The totals felt heavy, not because of the money itself, but because of what they represented. Not one of them had mentioned these debts in the courtroom. Not one of them had acknowledged them when they accused me of manipulation. They had conveniently forgotten the ways they had leaned on her, the ways they had drained her, slowly, confidently, always assuming she would never hold them accountable. Lydia closed the folder gently. These are collectible debts. You have two choices. You can forgive them entirely, or you can pursue legal repayment. Her eyes met mine. This is not about punishment. It is about deciding what kind of future you want with these people. I took the folder and nodded. Let me think. She gave me space. But even as I walked toward my car, I already knew the answer. Forgiving the debt was not the problem. The problem was the pattern. They took, they laughed. They were dismissed. And when consequences arrived, they acted as if the universe had malfunctioned. If I forgave the debts without conditions, the cycle would simply begin again. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. The steering wheel felt colder than the air. I kept thinking of the words I had found in Grandma's handwriting. They did not know what to do with her. And then the other one. Let her choose her own life. She had spent years protecting me in ways I had not understood. She had also protected them from themselves. Now all of that protection is gone. That evening I called Lydia. I want to proceed, I said quietly, but not to collect the money. I want something else. What is that? I want legal boundaries. Ironclad, non-negotiable. There was a pause, then a slow breath. We can do that. It will require mutual agreement. They will not like it. I almost smiled. They do not have to like it. The following week, we filed formal notices of debt against each family member. Nothing inflammatory, nothing designed to humiliate. Just numbers, documents, dates, signatures, facts. I expected silence at first. What I got instead was a flood. My dad called 13 times in one afternoon. I let each call go to voicemail. My mom texted paragraphs, oscillating between apology and accusation. Jonah sent a message asking if I was serious. Colin wrote a single line. This is insane. By the third day, they switched from outrage to desperation. My dad finally left a voicemail I listened to twice because I could not tell if the trembling in his voice was anger or fear. Maybe both. We did not mean for things to go this far. We were confused. We made mistakes. You have to understand. I did understand, probably more clearly than he realized. When they realized the debts were legally valid and legally enforceable, panic took over completely. They asked for a meeting. Lydia advised against seeing them alone, so she arranged a conference room at her office. The day of the meeting, I arrived early. The room was small, plain, with a rectangular table and stiff chair. I sat on one side. Lydia sat beside me. My family filed in slowly, like people entering a doctor's office for results they were not prepared to hear. My dad looked older than he had a month ago. My mom avoided my eyes. Colin shifted restlessly, and Jonah attempted a smile that collapsed halfway. We settled into our seats. The silence stretched. Finally, my dad cleared his throat. We know about the debts. We did not think they still mattered. It was a long time ago. I kept my voice calm. Grandma kept records. They matter because they were hers. My mom folded her hands tightly. We cannot pay them. You know that. Lydia spoke. My client is not requesting repayment. She is requesting boundaries. Jonah leaned forward. Boundaries for what? Lydia slid a set of documents across the table. These agreements state that in exchange for forgiving the debt, you will no longer contact her by phone or text. You will not visit her home or workplace. You will not request money or favors. If there is ever necessary communication, it will go through this office. My dad exhaled slowly, stunned. You want to cut us off completely. I met his eyes. You already did, years ago. This just puts it in writing. He flinched. My mom's eyes filled with tears. Colin muttered something under his breath. Jonah stared at the papers. This is cruel, my mom whispered. No, I said softly. Cruel would have been collecting the money. This is mercy with structure. The room went still. For a moment, I thought my dad might refuse, that he would stand up, rage, storm out, claim principle over practicality. But then he picked up the pen. His hand shook as he signed. My mom hesitated, wiping her cheeks before taking the pen. Colin signed without looking at me. Jonah was last. He paused, staring at the document, breathing hard as if the act itself stole oxygen. Then he signed. Lydia collected the papers, organizing them neatly into her folder. "Thank you," she said simply. They remained seated, staring at the table, each of them processing what they had just agreed to. My dad finally looked up. "Is this what you want?" I nodded. "It is what I need." He opened his mouth as if searching for something meaningful to say. Nothing came. He closed it again. Our meeting ended without hugs, without promises, without reconciliation. Only signatures. They left slowly, one by one, until the room held only the echo of their footsteps and the faint, unfamiliar feeling of space around me. I waited until the hallway was quiet before gathering my things. The agreement sat inside Lydia's folder, legally binding, final, unshakable. The debts were forgiven, the ties were severed, and for the first time in my life, the boundaries were mine to draw. I stepped out of the conference room, the soft click of the door behind me marking the end of one world and the beginning of another. I walked back into the storage unit on a quiet Sunday morning, a few weeks after the agreements were signed and the last piece of paperwork had settled into place. The air inside was cooler than I remembered, but cleaner too, almost like the space itself understood something had shifted. Most of the boxes are gone now. Lydia had arranged for a company to help catalog, distribute, and donate everything according to the instructions my grandma left behind. The unit that once held decades of her life was nearly empty. The concrete floor bare except for one box in the back corner, the only box I had asked them to leave. I stood there for a while before walking toward it. The echo of my footsteps bounced lightly off the metal walls, an oddly comforting sound. When I reached the box, I crouched down and brushed dust from the lid. It was the smallest one in the entire unit, no bigger than something used to hold old photographs or letters. I lifted it carefully and carried it to the center of the room, setting it on the floor where the sunlight from the doorway reached it. My hands were steady as I opened the lid. Inside were envelopes bound with a thin ribbon, a few folded papers, and one worn notebook. I recognized my grandmother's handwriting immediately. Rounded, precise, patient. I lifted the top envelope. My name appeared on the front in blue ink. I sat down cross-legged, the cool concrete grounding me, and opened it. The letter began simply, in the way she always spoke, clear and without decoration. "If you are reading this, then you opened the unit not because you expected anything, but because you respected my intention. That alone tells me everything I needed to know." I continued reading, her voice threading through each sentence. She wrote about the years I lived with her in Boise. In the mornings we sat together while she drank coffee and I colored in silence. The birthdays she made were small on purpose, because she knew I did not enjoy crowds. The way she learned my rhythms without asking me to change them. She wrote that she had saved everything for a reason, that she wanted me to know my life had mattered to someone from the beginning, even when I did not see it. Then the final line, "If you opened this when they laughed, you were never the trash." I let the page rest in my lap. My eyes did not fill, but something inside me loosened, quietly, gently. The way roots let go of old soil when they have finally grown past it. I read the line again. She knew exactly what she was doing. She always had. I placed the letter back in the box and looked around the empty unit. The walls seemed taller now, the space wider. I thought of my family, of the hearing, of the signatures on the agreements. I thought of the years I had spent believing I was hard to love, complicated, inconvenient, an afterthought. I thought of the moment I closed my bag around the key at the New Year gathering, and how small that decision had seemed. It was strange, sitting in the middle of an empty room and feeling, for the first time, full. I pulled the notebook from the box. Inside were odd little entries, notes she had written to herself, observations about me at different ages. She saw me try something new. She saw me withdraw. She saw me stand my ground in ways I never noticed. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet record of love. One entry from when I was around 8. "She does not speak loudly, so you must listen differently. If you listen differently, you will learn her just fine." I closed the notebook and held it in both hands. All my life I had been treated like a puzzle no one wanted to finish. She had been the only one who ever tried to understand the picture instead of forcing the pieces. I placed the notebook gently back in the box and folded the flap shut, tying the ribbon back in place. I decided to keep only this one box. Nothing else had the same weight or meaning. Nothing else held the truth the way these pages did. The air shifted slightly as I stood, the metal door rattling faintly in the wind outside. I walked toward the entrance with the box held against my chest. The sunlight spread across the threshold like a quiet invitation. There was no victory in the legal win. No thrill in the boundary agreements. No sense of triumph in the silence that followed. What there was instead felt steadier, cleaner, more honest. The kind of peace that does not declare itself, but simply arrives and sits down beside you. I paused at the doorway and looked back into the unit one last time. Empty space, clean floor. A place that once held the proof of a life and now held nothing except the echo of what mattered most. I reached for the pull handle and eased the door downward. The metal rolled smoothly, lowering the room into shadow. As it neared the ground, a single line of bright light stretched across the floor, then narrowed, then disappeared completely with a final click. The quiet afterward felt like an exhale. I walked to my car with the box in my arms, unlocked the door, and placed it carefully on the passenger seat. I sat for a moment, both hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing in the stillness. What I kept was small, but it was everything. The only things worth carrying forward. The story of who I had been, the truth of who I was becoming. When I turned the key in the ignition, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. Not triumphant, not wounded, just steady, present. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I thought about how many years I spent trying to earn a place at a table where I had never been seen. I thought of the quiet strength in choosing a different table entirely. And I thought of everyone who has ever been told they were too much or not enough for the people who were supposed to love them. So before this chapter closes, I want to leave you with something that has stayed with me long after the courtroom: the signatures and the storage unit door. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power. And truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from. I drove forward onto the open road, the box beside me, the horizon stretching wide ahead. And just like that, I finally chose my own life.